So 2 p.m, so we'll start the meeting. Agenda item number 1, minutes to approve as a correct record the minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 10th of March 22. Do I have someone to propose that as an accurate record? Councillor Taylor, and seconded, Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
That's carried. Thank you, Chair.
Urgent business item 2. I do have an item of urgent business. We are looking at the committee meeting for an additional meeting, which is due to be on the 24th of November at 2 p.m. And I believe that the reason for this is because we're hoping that Grant Thornton can make that meeting and present the final accounts. So we've left it as late as possible for them so that they can get them done on time and set the new meeting for them. The other benefit of that meeting is that it reduces the workload for the meeting in October as well. So because the agenda in October was looking fairly substantial. So there is a recommendation. I believe you've got that recommendation, Mr.
The recommendation, Chair, will literally be that an additional audit committee meeting added to the plenary meetings to take place on the 24th of November at 2.
So I would propose that. To have a seconder. Councillor Taylor. All those in favour?
That's unanimous.
Unanimous. That's the only item of urgent business I've got. Division of the agenda. There won't be any necessity to divide the agenda today. Declaration of interest in accordance with the Code of Conduct. Members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items being considered at this meeting. Does any member wish to declare an interest? None to declare. So agenda item number 5 is Grant Thornton's audit plan. Mrs. Buckle has joined us remotely. Unfortunately, Grant Thornton couldn't make it today because the people who do their audits for them are all on holiday at the moment. So if I can hand over to Mrs. Buckle for you to just cover the agenda item number 5, the audit plan.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So yes, this is Grant Thornton's audit plan, which we normally have at this point in the year before the draft accounts are issued and audited. So this is agenda item 5. If I just go through the audit plan, so on page 3 we have the key matters. So this is just Grant Thornton setting out some key matters that they will look at in this year's audit. One of those is around infrastructure assets, and you will see that set out there on page 3. So that's looking at the accounting treatment around infrastructure assets. We have looked at this as a council. We don't feel this is really going to affect us. This is something that is a national issue. It's been going on for a couple of years. It more affects upper tier authorities, where transport authorities, where you've got things like roads and those types of infrastructure assets. So we don't think this will have a major impact on us, but it is there for completeness from Grant Thornton. Moving on to page 4 of their report, which is the introduction and headlines. They have set out there what the 4 significant risks. So that is around management override of controls, valuation of land and buildings, valuation of the investment properties, and valuation of the pension fund net liability. And those are 4 key risks that you will see in our audit plan each year. They've also set out their materiality levels, which they are saying that they've determined materiality to be just over £1 million. In the prior year, it was 905,000, and that equates to approximately 2% of our prior year gross expenditure. And they will report anything over 53,000. So that's the level at which they've set as being clearly trivial, what they call clearly trivial. So anything that they find during their audit which has a value over 53,000 will be reported in their audit report around November time. They also set out there individually those significant risks. So going on to page 5, They talk about the revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions, which has been rebutted. They don't consider that to be a significant risk for us as South Hants District Council. And they've also put a bit there about fraud as well. Over the page, on to page 6 of Grant Thornton's, it's page 12 of the agenda. Again, they talk about management override of controls, and they have put some text there around when they did our audit last year. It did require Pauline's team to have some manual intervention to do the transaction listing. So these are reports that they require to do their audit, which basically downloads all of the transactions from the ledger. These are very sizable reports, as you can imagine, and at the moment we don't have that ability to run those reports automatically. It takes a member of our staff quite a fair bit of time to put those reports together, and that's what they're referring to there when they're referring to a significant amount of manual intervention. It's just that we've had to spend staff time on putting those reports together rather than it being automated from the system. That is something we're still working on with our supplier, and Pauline's team are looking at that. Valuation of land and buildings. Again, this is something that the auditors always do quite a lot of work on, and that will be the same again this year. As over the page on page 13 of our agenda, valuation of investment properties. So the council has 2 investment properties, and we have got the valuations of those which have come in. There's no significant change really in those valuations. One of those investment properties, the one at Dartmouth, has increased in value by 50,000. This is the fair value valuation. So both of those, we also own land at Lee Mill. So both of those valuations together, in the previous year, they were valued at just over 18.56 million. In this year's balance sheet, you will see that go up by £50,000. It will go up to 18.61 million. So again, they will do their testing around those valuations and look at the reports. We commission outside valuations on those. Also on page 13, we've got the valuation of the pension fund net liability. We have literally only just received our pension fund reports, but we can confirm that at 31st of March in this year, our pension liability has decreased. So it's gone from just over 61 million down to 52.6 million. Again, that's something you'll see when the draft accounts are published at the end of July, and we can give some explanation around that. So again, that's something that Grant Thornton will look at. They'll test the assumptions, but that is information that comes to us from Devon County Council, being the administrative authority. Then over the page, they have pulled out other matters that they will look at. So, for example, on page 19 of our agenda, they have picked out the iTrent system, which is our new payroll system. As this is a new system which we have implemented around the year end, they will do some testing around that. So they've put in their report there that is, they will do some planned IT testing around the migration from the old system to the new payroll system. Over the page, they've got their work on the value for money arrangements, again in very similar format to prior years. And then on page 21 of our agenda, they have set out their audit team and when they are looking to produce their audit findings and their audit opinion. And yes, if we are able to have the audit committee in November, then that's when we would be aiming to have the audited accounts presented to the audit committee. The draft accounts will be presented to the audit committee in September following their publication by the end of July. We've then got the audit fees on page 23, and you will see there that there has been a £5,000 uplift for remote working. Pauline and I spoke to Grant Thornton about that. That is something that has gone in all of Grant Thornton's clients' audit reports. So the 5,000 is not specific to us as South Hams. It is something that is in every audit plan of Grant Thornton where they are the auditor. They have said that that is their price for the uplift for remote working. And we've spoken to them about that. And I think we would be looking at sort of hybrid model, really, where we are in some of the time with the auditors, but not sort of 5 days a week. And obviously they will let us know which members of staff they need to speak to on certain days. So we're looking at how we can make that work between us, really. In terms of good news on the audit fees, as part of the spending review, the government have given councils nationally 15 million to compensate for the increase in audit fees, and our share of that is £17,229. So we have received that 17,000. That was on the back of the Redmond review. So we do have 17,000 from as a sort of government grant that we can put towards any increase in fees. Thank you very much, Chairman. Very happy to take any questions on the report.
I have a question to start, Mrs. Buckle. Why does it cost more money to Grant Thornton to have people work from home?
I think it's they're saying that it costs more for a remote audit because they're not able to sit with staff of Pauline's team in the finance team and speak together about the information that they need and show us what evidence we need to provide for the audit. And they're just saying that is quicker and more efficient if we are able to sit together in the same room and obviously, look at things together on the finance system. Whereas if that's done remotely, their argument is that can take longer, especially if there's a lot of sort of email communication rather than being able to sit in a room and bottom out any issues together. As I say, it is something standard that they're putting in all their clients' reports. It's not specific to us, but that is their that is something that they have decided as a firm.
Okay, thank you. Do any other councillors? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Please, could you give us a possible percentage on what our investment properties are gaining annually for us? Because we got a figure of 50,000 there. I was just, sorry, you can't hear me too well. We got an annual figure of 50,000 or a lift of 50,000. What would be the percentage on the investment properties? Some of these properties you've had in under hand for quite a long time. And it would be nice to know what percentage we're getting as opposed to what percentage is costing us.
Yes, we will be doing a full report on our 2 investment properties, which will come to the September audit committee. I mean, if you purely look at the increase in the valuation, then it's an increase of about 0.27%. But obviously that valuation is only a book valuation, and it's not like the private sector where any increases or decreases in valuation go through our sort of profit and loss account. It is something which goes through something which is called the MERS account. So it is in that respect a sort of paper valuation, if you like, and doesn't impact on our bottom line or on things like council tax. That's how local government accounting works. In terms of the rental income that we are getting on those properties, again, that is something that we'll set out in that report that comes in September. But yes, that's income that we have built into our base budget. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Yes, that does. I'm just looking at the return on investment. Because if we pay, whether we pay 1.5 or whatever, we only make 0.75, it doesn't make business sense. That's all. Yeah,
the return on investment is around about 1.5, 1.6% for the investment properties. That is the one which was in Dartmouth, and it's different for the one where it's a land valuation, because we didn't take out any borrowing for that.
Any other questions, Councillor Spencer?
Press the right button. Lisa, it's not very fair to direct these comments at you, and for your face up there on the screen, I'm actually picturing the initials GT. So would you please accept this in that sort of light? And I'm not going to apologise for sounding like a broken record, but the subject of fees is something that I find very irritating, and it's something that should be addressed directly with Grant Thornton, who for one reason or another aren't here. I'm also disappointed in their non-appearance today, because as far as I'm aware, they knew about this meeting and they should really be here. But accepting that they aren't, if I look at their fees, they're proposing to put up their fees by almost 14%. And that includes this arbitrary 5,000. And I echo Councillor Austin's comments about why is it more expensive to do remotely. And I'm wondering whether we're going to consider charging a similar sort of fee, which might just happen to be £5,000, for the fact that we can't see them face to face, and the additional work that we're involved in, you're involved in producing what they want to see. But leaving that aside as well, if we look at their base fee of £36,000, they've lumped on another £25,000 for extras, and that's about 70% in my book. And I'm concerned that in those extras, as they call them, on page 17 of their report, they've come up with a very precise £687.50 for enhanced audit procedures for property, plant and equipment. And clearly they know what they're doing there and how much it's going to cost. But a fairly arbitrary £9,000 for additional work for value for money, and this £5,000 not satisfactorily explained. So if they can quote and be accurate on one, I'm not sure why they can't quote and be accurate on others. They also put down all of these increases, as far as I can read from the reports, on government and PSAA guidelines and issues. None of them seem to be attributable to Grant Thornton. And I'm just wondering where they figure into this, because they haven't delivered really on their reports in the past. Their service standards have dropped consistently over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm just wondering why we should be paying through the nose, in my view, for a company that's delivering less and less. And I'm wondering the extent to which they can look at these increases in fees against our ability to increase our income by 13%, 14%, which, as far as I'm aware, haven't got a hope in hell of doing. So I don't think they're being particularly commercial. So I'm really concerned about the lack of clarity in their reports on fees, and I feel that they owe us some sort of greater explanation than they put down in this document. Sorry, Lisa.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think those are all really good points. Yes, both the engagement lead Jackson, the audit manager Ollie, they have apologised that they're not able to be at the meeting today. But they did say, you know, if there are questions around audit fees, they're very happy to discuss that at the next audit meeting. I think in terms of the audit fees, I think the Redmond review acknowledged that audit fees had been probably set too low, and it wasn't really realistic to be able to deliver the audits to the quality that is needed for the fee that was set back in the time. Members will be aware we are in a 5-year audit contract, if you like, with Grant Thornton. So we will have Grant Thornton up until sort of March 2023. We have signed up to the public sector audit appointments for the next 5-year auditor appointment. That will be from April 2023 onwards. And I think it will be interesting to see what the audit fees will be when that 5-year term is renegotiated and retendered. I am expecting the audit fees to be higher. In terms of their audit fees, which they've set out there on page 23, they do, I think Grant Thornton would say that since they did their tender sort of 5-6 years ago, they have had to now, there's been a requirement on them to do more work around property, plant and equipment and pensions. So those are the 2 areas that they're having to do more work. I think personally what I feel was disappointing about the Redmond review was many 151 officers, including myself, made representations to the Redmond review around the amount of audit work that is done around those 2 areas feels disproportionate for the fact that both pensions and property, plant and equipment, these are things which do not impact on the council's bottom line. So therefore, if you're doing a lot of work around areas that have no impact, their movement have no impact on our income and expenditure account, it's much more set up for the private sector, where those movements in valuation obviously do have an impact on a company. But the Redmond review concluded that both of those areas still needed the same level of auditing as we've had. And I think councils up and down the country would say the amount of work that their teams have to do, our team has to do, the assets team, on providing evidence around balance sheet valuations for property, plant and equipment and investment properties. It is an awful lot of work. And it's the same for pensions, for 2 areas which do not have an impact really on the council's bottom line or income and expenditure account. I think in terms of the audit fees, as you say, they've quoted fixed fees there for the pensions work and fixed assets work. And I think that's because I do know that Grant Thornton have got their own pensions department and asset valuation department, and therefore I think they know that that's a set amount of time that they will do. So that's probably why they've been able to pin down the prices on property, plant and equipment and pensions. I mean, the government have recognised that audit fees are going to increase, so that's why there was £15 million nationally in the spending review, and we have received 17,000 of that. So yeah, I think the subject of audit fees is always very difficult, but Grant Thornton did say that they are very happy to answer any further questions on that in the next audit committee meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, sorry, just following on from that, Lisa. 2 things. One, the pensions work, I noticed they quoted a fee which is quite precise, and I accept the reasons that you're saying they make an awful lot of sense. But that is a total duplication of everything that DCC does and the scheme actuaries do. So whilst it's only £687, it is actually just a duplication. It's an auditor effectively checking an auditor, and that seems to me to be a nonsense, and I have actually made that comment before. Especially as you say, it doesn't make any impact anyway. And if we could say £687.50, that would be something nice, but not a huge amount. The other thing is that on the next page, which is page 18 of their report, 34 of hours, they talk about the additional £11,500, which is paid to provide the certification of the council's housing benefit subsidy. And that's not an auditor's job, as I understand it. And they seem to be reflecting that that stance in their own report. Is there scope there to buy that service at a reduced cost and not pay the exorbitant fees we seem to be paying? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So 2 points there around the pensions. Yes, you're right. So what Grant Thornton do is they've got their own sort of actuaries, if you like, if that test the work of the actuaries of Devon County Council, who are the pensions administrative authority. So they will do things like test or look at the assumptions that have been made by the actuaries of the Devon County Council Pension Fund, and see if they agree with those assumptions, or if they have a different opinion, what difference that would make on the pension fund liability at the end of the year. They do that for all councils. So again, in their opinion, they feel they need that second opinion, if you like, on the pension fund liability, because it is a significant figure in the balance sheets of all councils. So that they feel that gives them the assurance to be able to sign our audit opinion that it is a true and fair valuation. In terms of the housing benefit subsidy claim, that is something which we do have to get audited. That's a requirement of the Department of Work and Pensions. Again, the housing benefit claim is something that's very complex, very specialist subject. So there are only really 2, maybe 3 firms that could provide that. All of the Devon authorities have their housing benefit audit claim done by Grant Thornton, and it makes sense to do that when they are our main auditors. If you go with a different firm, you get the problems of duplication, really, that can cause extra fees, and all of the councils are paying around about £10,000. We do as much of that work as possible ourselves, so the fee would actually be higher if our in-house benefits team didn't do the amount of transaction testing. So if we got Grant Thornton to do that, our fee would actually be higher. So that's the lowest fee that we can get, really, with doing the majority of the work ourselves, apart from the bits that they have to do. But again, that's a requirement from the DWP to have our subsidy claim audited. Thank you.
Any other questions from councillors? I think we take a vote on this in terms of the audit plan. We need to approve the audit plan as it stands. Is that correct, Mrs. Buttle?
Yes, please, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah. So the committee is asked to note and approve the audit plan under agenda item number 5. Could I have someone propose that? Councillor Brown, and seconded Councillor Taylor. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you.
So moving on to agenda item number 6, Grant Thornton's guidance for reviewing the accounts. Mrs. Buckle again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So at a previous audit committee meeting, we talked about providing members of the audit committee with some further information and training around how to effectively scrutinise and challenge the council's accounts when they are presented. And Grant Thornton put this document together for us, whereby they've given a list of questions that for audit committee members, so that when the draft accounts are presented to the audit committee, this will be at the September meeting, then there's just some ideas of questions that could be asked on the draft accounts, and Grant Thornton on the right hand side there have put reasons around, you know, why that may be a pertinent question to ask. So they've put this together, hopefully as something which would be helpful for audit committee members. If you feel that you would also like a training session on top of that, I think that's something we talked about. We did do something like that a couple of years ago, where we looked at a set of accounts of another authority, and said, you know, if these were the accounts that were presented to the audit committee, what sort of questions would we ask? So we could do some, if members would like, we could also do some training, or if the questions are sufficient, then I'm in the committee's hands, really. We can do either, but they felt this was a helpful summary for audit committee members of different areas in the accounts that could be looked at. Thank you.
Do members have any questions regarding agenda item number 6? Councillor Spencer, would you like to ask? Sorry.
In terms of the offer of additional training, and I'm only speaking for myself, I think some additional training would be good. One of the things that the report doesn't talk about is the competence of the audit committee members. Or not in any great detail anyway. I'd like to tick that box and be more confident that what I'm saying makes sense.
Yeah, that's certainly something we could organise.
What sort of time frame do you think that would be possible to organise?
Well, the draft accounts will be issued by the end of July, and then we've got an audit committee meeting in September. It's whether we could do something sort of towards the beginning of September when we've got those draft accounts, if that would be helpful.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I just got a little bit concerned about running the training now when we're nearly at the end of this council. I mean, we don't know how many of us are going to be here next year, and whether it's a bit late in the day to have this. We could have done with this 2 years ago.
Take your point, Councillor Taylor. Perhaps it might be better to leave training until the beginning of June next year.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. I mean, that is something we could build into the induction programme for sort of, you know, more towards summer next year.
Yeah, well, I think we'll consider that, you know, at the time really when we look at the new audit committee. So agenda item number 6. Any other questions on agenda item number 6? In that case, I think we're asked to note and approve the guidance for reviewing the accounts. Can I have someone to propose that? Councillor Brazil, and seconded. Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
Unanimous. Thank you.
Unanimous. Item number 7. We come back to you, Mrs. Buckle. Information informing the audit risk assessment for 21-22. Would you just speak briefly on that?
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, this is a document that the Audit Committee will receive each year prior to the draft accounts being issued at the end of July. So this goes through areas of the audit risk assessment. So, for example, it's looking at things like general inquiries of management. So what happens is we get sent this template. The questions on the left-hand side are completed by Grant Thornton, and then the management responses on the right-hand side are completed by myself and the team. I'll just go through a couple of those. So, for example, in terms of general inquiries of management, it's looking at things like can we provide certain details as part of the year-end accounts, which we will do as part of our audit working papers. It goes into areas such as fraud and things like fraud risk assessments. So members will be aware we've got some quite detailed fraud risk assessments around the business grants that we've administered over the last 2 years. There was also an internal audit review on that as well, which gave substantial assurance. And we do say in their areas of fraud that are identified is mainly around benefits, but also we have got a very small number of business grants that have been referred to the Devon Audit Partnership. We don't have our own in-house fraud team, but we do we're part of the Devon Audit Partnership that helps us also provide our internal audit services, and we make use of their fraud team as well. And that's something that we certainly did as we were administering the business grants. Going forward on there, it also talks about things like law and regulations, related parties. So again, members be aware that you're asked to sign a related party disclosure as part of the year-end audit of the accounts, and that's something that Grant Thornton look at as part of their audit. There are questions there around things like going concern. So again, I have to complete documents for Grant Thornton to give assurances around the going concern status of the council. And then there are things like accounting estimates at the back of the report. Again, things like provisions, accruals. These are, as I say, quite standard documents that we complete each year. But I think those are the main points, Chairman. Thank you.
Any questions from members on item 7? Yeah, Councillor Spencer.
Sorry to be a pain. When the report, this part of the report, looks at a lot of internal issues and things that could happen within the council. And I just wondered what steps are taken when someone approaches us with information to secure funding or grants or something like that. And I won't name any companies that might do so, but what information do we get from them, or how do we justify the figures that they give to us to ensure that they're as accurate as they can be before we proceed with any funding?
Sorry, does that relate to the business grants that the council administered?
It wasn't specifically business grants, but it might well be grants and other forms of funding where an external organisation approaches us and wants funding from the council. They supply figures and justification for that request. What steps do we take, check the information that's supplied to us, on which we are being asked to make a decision?
Yeah, so on an annual basis, the council considers a report on its partnerships. So those are annual grants which are given to third-party organisations. And there was a template which was drawn up by our governance team around partnership funding. So that looked at lots of things in terms of objectives, what were the outcomes of the grants that were given, and each organisation was asked to submit a sort of business case, really, of for the funding. So articulating within their grant request of what outcomes would be delivered from that. And members considered those in quite a lot of depth and detail. And then that we entered into those arrangements for a 3-year period. So those will be due for renewal, and we'll be considering those as part of the budget process for this year. Because we are approaching the 3rd year of that 3-year agreement. And obviously those partnerships and external organisations do need to have certainty of what their funding is going to be for future years. In terms of other grants that we may give, there are grants such as the locality grants for members. Obviously there are checks and balances built into that. So performers have to be completed, and then that's checked by the team before any payments are made. And similarly for the business grants, there were very in-depth questions that had to be provided for those. There was lots of detailed government guidance, particularly around the fraud tools that we had to use. So again, for the business grants, that again is something that we are audited on by BAYS. So what they do is, once we've administered the business grants, they pick a sample of those grants and look at the evidence that we collected before we made the payment. And I'm really pleased to say that at the moment, all of the grants that have been picked as samples, BAYS have been given that assurance that that was all done in accordance with government guidance, and they haven't had any issues with any of the grants that we have administered to date. Thank you.
Any other questions from members? Councillor Brazil.
Thank you, Lance. I was going to raise it in the first item 5 it was, and that's about risk, because I see, I've always sometimes worried where the questions should come. And my main thing is with risk is that I appreciate that they seem to have listed some of the risks, or where they see the main risks. That's certainly not where I see the main risks. The main risks I see at this council are obviously waste collection, fusion, and some of our capital projects, where that all doesn't seem, they're auditors, they're meant to in some way, I appreciate they look at what's been spent and how it's happened, but when we're looking at risk, that is the one way it can be quite prescient and flag up or red flag things that might happen. And I just wonder whereabouts in the report, would we expect to see these issues that I think are going to particularly, I think you're absolutely right when you talked about issues that don't really affect the bottom line. The ones I've just mentioned certainly do affect our bottom line, be it in the revenue account or indeed our, debt management and things like that. So if I maybe have a bit of clarification on that would be useful. Thank you.
Mrs. Buckle.
Yes, thank you. So our auditors do look at all of our reports that go to our council meetings and that go to our executive, obviously our audit committee, our review and scrutiny committee. So they will look at all of the reports that have happened during the 21-22 financial year. I think in Grant Thornton's report, right at the very start there, in their audit plan, they do talk about waste. In the council update, which I think is on page 9, and again as part of the value for money arrangements, as I say, they look at all of our audit reports. Obviously, in terms of the financial parts, capital projects, they will obviously audit the capital expenditure in the year and also how that's been financed. And we'll be doing a capital outturn report on Q4, which will go to the executive in September, which will detail both the revenue position and the capital position. So what was the expenditure on capital projects? How was that financed? But again, that is something that they will audit as part of the 21-22 accounts, as will be the position on the income and expenditure account. So, for example, with regards to Fusion, they will look at the report that we took to members on the 31st of March 2022, because that was in the financial year that they are auditing, and look at the recommendations, and so they will, for example, look at the fact that we took some independent advice on that, and that was attached for members as part of that leisure report. So yes, that they will look at all of those things either as part of the core audit or as part of their value for money audit opinion. But as I say, they do look at all of our council reports as well, and go through those. So every single report that's gone through in the 21-22 financial year will be part of their audit. Thank you.
Councillor Reserve.
Yeah, no, I should come back on that. Look, I understand that's what they do. What I am saying is concerning me is that what they've listed as risks, as the biggest risks that this council faces, I don't think those are the biggest risks that the council faces at all. And I'm interested to understand how they see that our relationship with FCC and the future of that and the implications that may have to us. Fusion, the latest press reports we're getting about Fusion, not necessarily here, which seems to be okay, but lots of the rest of the country. We've invested a lot of money in Fusion and we're expected to have that paid back over the medium term. Well, we won't get it paid back if Fusion go belly up. These are all risks, real risks, that they just